Thanks everybody for joining. Really excited about our panel today, Designing Accessible Websites for an Inclusive and Equitable Future. My name is Jesse. I'm a design director here at Exigy. We are a digital agency and a B Corp, and we partner with nonprofits and government entities to design and build technology to improve lives. Exigy are the creators of the Bloom Housing platform, which is a web-based affordable housing platform that scales access to affordable housing process in the Bay Area. We also work with our civic partners to bring social services and resources to users and residents, including the city of Oakland. Today, I'm joined by some panelists who are going to help us talk about how we all can champion accessibility in our digital services, our digital experiences and design. And I'm looking forward to a lively discussion, and we're going to make sure to make room at the end of our time together for questions from y'all. Feel free to post those questions in the chat. So yeah, general housekeeping. Please use the Q&A feature on Zoom to ask questions. In case we don't cover something you're interested in, feel free to reach out to any of us. You can find me and the panelists on LinkedIn. You can connect to us in the Slack channel for this panel, and feel free to leave your email address with any questions, and we'll make sure to get back to you. So yeah, to get started, Nicole and Sean, I'll hand it off to you if you want to introduce yourself, your name, pronouns, and organizations, and maybe include one thing that you're excited to talk about today.
Sure, I can go first. My name is Nicole Nedich, she, her, hers. I'm an assistant to the city administrator in the city of Oakland, and excited to be doing this work focused mostly around design and digital service delivery in the city. I'm really excited to talk about design standards and how we incorporate accessibility into our values and principles.
Hey everyone, I'm Sean Doherty. I'm an access technology specialist at Lighthouse San Francisco. I'm a low vision user of assistive technology. I go by he, him, and I'm really excited that accessibility is kind of gaining a lot of traction lately, particularly during COVID, and really seeing a lot of growth in the space, and I'm partnering with a lot of great organizations here in the Bay Area. So just really excited about those partnerships and having the discussion today around some best practices and strategies around web accessibility.
Cool. And you touched on it there, Sean, but I think to sort of kick us off, we've met once before, just to sort of talk about what we would actually address today. And I think this is something that's been on my mind is, so we have a lot of our partners returning to us. We have a lot of our users asking us specifically about accessibility right now. And it feels like we've, prioritized accessibility for a long time, but it feels like there's like a groundswell and excitement around addressing these issues right now. And I just wanted to start there as to like, why do we feel that is? And yeah, and use that to kind of start this conversation.
Sure. I think that's a great place to start with the why now question. It's a critical one. I think for those of us in the industry, as you mentioned, we've been working on it for quite a while, and it has been something that a lot of organizations have been thinking about. Maybe have been meeting, a certain level of compliance, or have been trying to make their products and services accessible to a certain degree. But that might have been just meeting some bare minimums. And there's many organizations that haven't really thought much about it at all up until COVID. And you could argue that accessibility might be a positive outcome of COVID over the last couple of years, or one of the potentially positive outcomes that basically has forced companies to start to think about it more, as their users have had to rely on products and services and have been increasingly utilizing more technology, both mobile technology and websites. And this is something that people with disabilities tend to rely on to an even greater extent. But during COVID, everyone has had to rely on technology more as we've been, distanced and relying on Zoom and other platforms and productivity tools and, services to order, our groceries and food remotely, and things like that, we may have been using before, but during COVID, we all started using those to an even greater extent. And so, basically, if you look at kind of the global population, there's over 1 billion people that identify as having a disability. So this breaks down to about 20% of the global population. And it's a very large addressable market that basically, if you don't optimize for, you're kind of missing out. So there's kind of this business use case and business opportunity. But I think a lot of the traction that's been gained has come out of COVID and the increasing use of digital technology and apps and tools.
First of all, I totally agree with all of what's been said. And I think we, in the government space, especially, we've seen everybody sort of move into the online space in order to access services, government services. For a long time, I've been working on and off on the City of Oakland's website for 12 or 13 years now. And it used to be, the big push used to be, how can we just get our services online? They were all in-person services. People were coming into our offices. We told a narrative, we told a story about how that was more accessible to provide these in-person services, because people couldn't access the web in the same way that they could access these in-person services or the phone services. And I think what happened, a few things happened. One is that we've definitely progressed in the government space to getting more and more services online. I think that there is definitely a better acknowledgement even before COVID that digital services are necessary in order to meet the needs of all of our residents in our community. But I think COVID just, proved that even more, as we no longer were showing up to the office. We didn't have the in-person services available. And we're not a company where we can decide who we're going to target or, focus our services on. We really need to meet the needs of everybody. And so that means having an accessible website and having accessible services. And we still have a long way to go to get there. But I think that finally, there's this acknowledgement that that's a really important thing, and that, we're not going to go back to providing the same level of in-person service that we did in the past. I think that it's also acknowledged that in-person services aren't as accessible as we maybe once, argued that they were. And so I think that's a lot of what's driving this increased interest, especially in the government space.
Yeah, I think building off of that, we've seen that a lot as well, that I think there has been an increased focus around government services and public services as a really good starting point for accessibility, because, there, of course, in an ideal world, every product and service will be available to everyone. But, in certain circumstances and certain products and services, are more critical than others. And so, oftentimes things will kind of start out within accessibility. There might be, litigation or a user that isn't able to access a product or service, and they may take action as a result of that. And that might drive a company towards, focusing on accessibility, remediating those issues, doing more testing, incorporating accessibility guidelines and standards more so into their products. But, it's one thing if someone with a disability has a challenge, streaming media or accessing, video platform or something like that. That is something that, is important for for their happiness, and they are entitled to have access to that. But it's a whole nother issue when that individual, can't ride BART or have access to public transportation or, be able to pay their taxes and things like that. So those critical government services are oftentimes where accessibility kind of begins, and where in those organizations are often having to focus on it more regularly. But during COVID, I think everyone has started focusing on it more. And I do think a lot of it has also been driven by a lot of the big tech companies that develop a lot of the devices that we use on a regular basis: laptop devices, mobile devices, companies like Apple, Google, Microsoft, and all of those big tech companies for the last probably 5 to 10 plus years have really started to build in accessibility features into their apps and into their devices. And so that's helped kind of drive the industry forward. And they have also held their partners accountable in those ways as well, which we've then seen that kind of trickle down to a lot of app developers that are partnering with those big tech companies. And it kind of also encourages partners to think about their websites as well.
So you bring up with the question of the legality of it, like what motivates people to even do this. And I guess my question there is, like all these things we talk about, like the guidelines, the WCAG guidelines, all of that stuff, like that's the bare minimum we can do. Like, and so there's a lot of like enforcement of like, what do you legally have to do in order not to get sued? So like, how do we change that motivation so that it becomes about reaching out to those people proactively, or like providing everyone delightful experiences and not just like the bare minimum experiences so that we don't get in trouble? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think a lot of that comes down to creating a company culture around accessibility. I think it's creating kind of a shift and getting people not only familiar with what it means to be accessible from a technical standpoint, so getting the engineers and developers on board and getting them the right resources to adhere to those guidelines, adopt them, understand how to either change their code or develop new code that's following those guidelines. So that's kind of a starting place, but it's really around getting the entire company excited about accessibility and understanding the implications of it. And it really comes down to thinking about, the product, whether it's a service or, a physical product, and as well as the end user. And if you're really thinking about the greatest addressable market, you'll want to consider, all possible users for that product or service, which will include people with disabilities, people that need to use assistive technology tools to access that website or that product. And so if you think about it kind of in that end of instead of trying to prevent litigation, if you think about it more as trying to increase access to more potential users, basically, those users are using different tools to access, but at the end of the day, they're still trying to achieve the same end goal, which is use your product or service, and they just have to use it in a different way. So if you really create that shift culturally, as well as provide the proper resources and partner with the right organizations, I think you can shift and create a culture that's really built around accessibility and really embraces it, as opposed to just dealing with it with lawyers and things like that, which aren't quite as fun and really not good for anyone.
Yeah, we've definitely seen that in Oakland, and I think that shift of the company culture is really, really important. We do a lot to make sure that we're in compliance with various different laws. And I feel like that's kind of the culture that government is, right? Are we in compliance? Have we met the laws, things like that. And so we've been working on accessibility on our city's website since the very beginning of having a city website. But it really has been about meeting those sort of baseline WCAG requirements, right? And so part of what we've really been trying to do with our website and our digital team within Oakland is set sort of a cultural a new cultural norm, I guess, in terms of what it is that we're trying to do. We're all here. We're all doing this work because we think that everybody should have access to government, and that we want everybody to be able to, to get the access that they need to government. And so when we start with that, and we actually bake that into the principles of why we're doing this work, in Oakland, we've set our key principles around equity, simplicity, and trust. And it's about really removing barriers to access to government, making things simple, easy to use, easy to find, and providing reliable and trustworthy information to the and services to the public. And so we've rooted everything that we do in those three values, which one I think helps the organization get excited actually about the work that we're doing, rather than just feeling like we're just trying to meet these minimum compliance rules. They see the bigger picture of what it is that we're trying to do, and they're excited to come on board. But also it helps us root the work that we're doing in these values and bring on the right partners in order to help us support this work. We're never going to be able to do it all within City Hall, and so by expressing those values, by expressing the principles that we're working towards, we're able to attract great partners like Lighthouse and Exegy and others into this work, because they see that vision as well, and they want to make it possible. And so I think that, getting down to sort of the basics, like, we've talked about like the how-to and all of that, like just getting to those, like, what are those core principles that can align people around the work that we're trying to do and move it from compliance to something that is a bigger vision that people can see.
Awesome. So that's great. So let's open this up a little bit. Like, I think, so for some folks, I'm not sure if everybody has visibility into this, but so when we talk about accessibility and doing all this work to make things accessible, like that might seem cryptic to some people. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time trying to demystify like what an engagement would actually look like. So I'd like to hear, from both of you, when it comes to approaching accessibility, or something like engaging with a partner such as yourself, Sean, what does a typical engagement look like? And what are some of the pieces and workflows that are sort of involved in an accessible audit or
Sure.
review?
Yeah, I think you both hit on this, that the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines and Standards can be a little bit overwhelming, particularly for people that aren't familiar with them. There's a lot of pieces in there to really trying to adhere to compliance and kind of meet all of those guidelines. And we kind of think of accessibility as being kind of an ongoing process. It's not necessarily about trying to be perfect and meeting every single guideline, but it's about kind of moving towards the end goal of being compliant. And oftentimes that requires kind of ongoing testing, and basically trying to meet those guidelines to the best of your ability, but also moving closer to really getting full usability. And that requires a combination of a couple different things. It requires basically, really understanding those guidelines across your organization, starting to basically socialize them out, and then start to think about automated tools. That's really a good starting place after your organization has a good understanding of the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines and some of those key design principles. It's really best to start to test out some of your websites, some of your pages on your own, using a automated tool. So there's some good free checkers out there you could use, such as like the Wave Checker from WebAIM. That's a pretty solid tool where you can start to run some of your pages through, get a good understanding of some of the potential issues that might exist, and at least kind of wrap your head around what might be problematic. And from there, it's usually best to kind of lay out some of your user journeys. So like when we meet with partners, we like to understand, okay, what are the end goals? Like what service is being provided? What is the product? What are the key steps that someone is trying to take when they visit that website? Are they trying to fill out a form to register for a newsletter? Are they trying to sign up, for a demo, or enroll in a webinar? Are they trying to just download PDF resources to learn more about, maybe like a bus schedule or something, or maybe they want to book transportation? All of those journeys are good to kind of document and think through of, kind of how any user would go through step by step. It's important to kind of have those journeys outlined and really think about them. And then after you've kind of done some initial testing on your own, just with like a free checker to get a sense of some of those issue areas, it's best to then involve an organization that can really help walk you through and do things like user testing and usability testing to really help you, identify all of the issues and really move towards remediation. So there's a lot of steps involved, but those are kind of where the places where I would recommend starting.
Great. Jesse, I would actually push this back to you because you really helped design the whole, our workflow and process within the city of Oakland. So it would be great if you could share a little bit about your experience. And then maybe I'm happy to share some of the things that I've seen as being the most helpful.
Yeah. I mean, we learned a lot when we kicked off the Bloom Housing Project. Initially, it was in San Francisco. So we actually were given a mandate to include like a wide swatch of communities in San Francisco. So we were introduced to Lighthouse at that time. And so there are a couple of things that really were successful for us, and that I was double down on some of the things that Sean may have already said. Is like we had like really crude prototypes. We kind of had a thing that kind of worked. It was it was on a phone, and we just brought it to Lighthouse. We're like, does this work? Like before we had a design, before we had invested a lot of time, just to kind of generally get some initial feedback about devices, like what devices make sense. What types of interactions make sense. So we got this like really early feedback right away. And then from there, we set up some automated tools in our system that kind of checked the things that we were doing on a code basis. And that stuff helped, again, keep everything minimally clean, technically clean. But then we stayed engaged with Lighthouse on an ongoing basis, and then brought stuff to them and had folks there test. We had 2 levels of testing that we did. One was with experts, like people just know accessible technology and like use this stuff like professionally, and they knew the problems to look for, and that helped us a lot. And then we did a second round of testing that was just with people who themselves are learning how to use it because they need to use it in their lives. And so they're not experts. They're just people that happen to interface with technology using assistive devices. And that gave us both accessibility testing and a combination of UX. And then that informed the things that we built at another level, and then set us up for a greater amount of success going forward. So doing all 4 of those things in succession, like really early kind of scaffolding work with experts, some automated tooling just to make sure that we're catching the easy stuff, but then engaging again with experts and folks who just use assistive technology in their daily lives really helped us kind of like clean stuff up. And at this point, we're re-engaging a lot of those methods in the city of Oakland.
I think I was just going to say, I think you raised a really important point there, Jesse, and that is definitely something we try to prioritize with basically our trusted tester groups, is that, as you mentioned, like internally, we can do a lot of testing ourselves, but a lot of our user testers meet a wide range of profiles. They use different technologies. Some of those users are fully relying on screen readers. Others are relying on magnification tools, and some are in between. And so I think that is really important to think about different user profiles and not always just work with an expert, to work with people that maybe aren't as tech savvy, but are really familiar with the accessibility tools that they need to rely on, and seeing how they approach your website and how the tools work for them is also really valuable. And it also helps you identify some gap areas that you might not have considered that the experts might take for granted, or, might just be easy for them to complete. So it is important to have a wide range of user profiles in that testing, and is definitely something to consider in the process.
And I'll just add that the next level of that is to have Sean's team come in and actually train upskill our engineers who are kind of using these tools like on a regular basis, the same way they would use like a code linter to check if the code is good. Like they could be even better if they had some one-on-one training with a partner like Lighthouse to come in and kind of bring their skill level up, so that our engineers act as proxies and can kind of do like double check some of the automated tooling with some in-browser testing that they're doing themselves once they have a more refined skill set. So yeah, Nicole.
I just want to emphasize the importance of user testing and taking it beyond the automated tools. And I think that the automated tools are a great baseline. And we certainly learned a lot as we did an audit across our website of, the various different pages. And we were able to use that to help prioritize some of the sort of, quicker fixes or things that we could do right away to improve accessibility across the site. But I think when you sit down and actually watch somebody navigate your website, using assistive technology, it really opens up all of the other things that are challenges. And sometimes it's not even just based on assistive technology, but you realize how things are complicated or unnecessarily structured in ways that don't support people being able to navigate the site. And so I think we saw as we did some of that in-person user testing, some things that never would have shown up in those automated tests, but were so obvious when you sat down and watched somebody utilize the website. And so not only, has that been an incredibly important piece for me to sort of understand and do some, help do some of the prioritization of where we should start. But it's also really, important, I think, for others to see how people are using and interacting with our site, and some of the barriers that we're creating, and how we might be able to remove those. It becomes so much clearer. So I just want to emphasize the user testing as being a really key component, and just make sure, I think that's the most important thing that we're doing, I guess, is moving beyond the automated tools to doing that in-person user testing.
Well, maybe we can expand this discussion a little bit more. Like the panel itself is about inclusive design. So like accessibility is like a piece of that. And we're talking about equity, and we're talking about supporting user needs. Can you both talk a little bit about how accessibility relates to the broader principles of inclusive or universal design a little bit?
Sean, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I wasn't sure if you were going to go. Sorry. It really, what we often see, and Nicole was hitting on this a little bit as well, is that typically these accessibility principles, they really adhere to a lot of universal design principles and how you think about creating the best overall experience for users. And so a lot of times when you design with accessibility in mind, it ends up driving your design process forward and making your end experience better for everyone. So there's a lot of kind of basic examples of this, incorporating things like closed captions, into all of your video content. Of course, that's really beneficial for deaf and hard of hearing users, but it also makes your website accessible on mobile when people are on maybe public transportation or in a crowded room, and they want to be able to understand some of your content that maybe you're distributing through your site that's video content, and that allows them to consume it as well. So things like that. There's many other examples, and in a lot of cases, when there's something that meets a minimum accessibility, it isn't always the best experience. And that checker, like an accessibility checker, might deem something to be accessible, but then when you test it, as Nicole pointed out, it's actually not. In a lot of cases, when you go back and make those changes, the end result is actually better. So as an example, a lot of blind users will navigate by links, like with screen readers. They'll use like first letter navigation, and they'll go through links on a website. And so if your website, basically, if you have those links labeled with the word link in there, like if it says in the copy, like link to Facebook, link to Instagram, link to YouTube, link to forum or something like that, link to newsletter, if that's actually in the text, it's going to allow a user that has vision to be able to, click through and access the link. They're going to understand what it is and what it means. But for a user who's blind that's using a screen reader, they're going to try to rely on that link navigation to kind of skip around and see what links are available. They're going to maybe type in F looking for Facebook. And if link is at the start, everything is going to be labeled with link, and they're not going to be able to basically use that first letter navigation. And so they're going to either become confused on where that link is, or they're going to have to key through every single link that's there in order to find what they're trying to find. And so basically, if you take that experience and you then redesign your site so that you remove that access copy and just label things, how they should be labeled, and just embed those links so that it just says Facebook or YouTube or subscribe here, without including that link in the text. It's actually a more clean design and a better experience for all users, including users that are relying on screen readers and that first letter navigation. So that's just kind of a simple example. There's many others, but these are things that lead to cleaner designs, better experiences, really for everyone.
I so much agree with that. And I think that that's what we kind of, when we talk about simplicity or simplifying content and information on our website, that's a lot of what we're talking about as well. Is so not only do we do an accessibility audit of all of our pages, but we've also done an audit of the grade level in which all of our text is in on our site. And, for a city like Oakland, where we have over 100 languages spoken, language accessibility is a big piece of what we're doing as well. And the simpler we make our language, our text in English, the simpler it is when it's translated into other languages as well, the more accessible it is. And so I think that, taking this beyond assistive technology, but thinking about the simplicity of our websites and what we're trying to communicate, and really having a focus on that helps make sure that everybody has access and can understand what's being asked of them, or how they can utilize a service, or all of that. When we did some of the user testing on the city's website, it was those pages that were really complicated and had lots and lots of text that were the hardest for people to navigate. And so, when you're tabbing through content, it's really important that it's really clear and that you're using headers correctly and things like that. And that all becomes clear as you're doing this. But as we're doing that work, and we're making it simpler for those that may have some barriers to accessing these services, we're actually making it simpler for everybody else as well. And so I think that's really an important frame to put on it.
I think you raised a really good point there, Nicole. And I think sometimes, to a point you also made earlier, that sometimes that usability testing can really drive that cleaner design. And I think sometimes that's important to, in that testing, to try to be involved in the process, sit down with someone who is a screen reader user, for example, and see their direct experience. Because once you see how they're kind of navigating and what the navigation structure looks like to them, as they're kind of tabbing through and navigating through headers and links and areas of the website, a lot of times you can understand through that navigation process how maybe that could be cleaner, and that might better inform the overall navigation of the website. You might find that maybe things are just unclear overall, or there's too many tabs at the top with too many drop downs and too many menu items that don't really make sense or are unnecessary. And you might start to refine that design and remove some of those unnecessary headers that are kind of cluttering the top navigation of the site. And that's going to improve the experience for everyone, but you might not realize it in some cases until you sit down with the screen reader user and really go through the website. So yeah, I think that can drive a better experience.
Cool. So we talked about a lot today, and I think if somebody were to leave this panel and go Google accessibility, they would be overwhelmed with the number of results that they got as far as like how to get started. So do we want to, like, I would like to wrap up before we get into the Q&A with like your last piece of advice, like a piece of advice for anyone like working to advance accessibility practices of their job, like, or the organization, like where do you get started?
Sure. I understand how it can be overwhelming. And I think at the end of the day, doing something is better than doing nothing. So even if you don't really know where to begin, just kind of taking an initial step is better than, not doing anything related to accessibility. So I would recommend with starting with the W3C, the World Wide Web Consortium, their website. They have the Web Accessibility Initiative, which is the part of that organization that is responsible for creating the web content accessibility guidelines. They have a lot of great documentation and kind of step-by-step processes and definitions and resources on their website. Basically, the W3C is responsible for kind of globally for web standards, but the WAI, the Web Accessibility Initiative, is a subset of that organization that is focused specifically on accessibility. And they've done a lot of work to kind of lay out those principles, break them down. There's a lot of modules on there that walk you through step by step. In addition to, you can start to understand what WCAG really means, how it's organized around kind of 4 key principles: perceivable, operable, understandable, and robustness of the site. Those 4 key principles where WCAG is kind of organized around and then broken into subsections. So I think that's a really great place to kind of start, get your head around what some of this compliance means and what accessibility really is at kind of the starting point. I think there's a lot of good resources out there. Companies like DQ, for example, and Level Access, they have like university pages with a lot of great resources and tutorials where you can even sign up for some courses and really start to understand accessibility. So I think those are great starting places, and then look to engage an organization or a partner that can really help you through the end-to-end process, including the user testing, usability assessments, and walkthroughs of your site to really ensure that you can get to a place where you're being compliant, you're having a great user experience for everyone, and you're able to remediate a lot of those issues that your site might have.
Yeah, I think those are great starting points. I think for a larger organization like ours, we have over 10,000 pages on the City of Oakland website. It can feel incredibly daunting to get started, especially after you run, some automated tools and see how many issues there are to address. But I think that a lot of it is about prioritization and just getting started somewhere. And so Exigy has been really helpful, with Oakland and just helping us helping us set up those priorities and think through what's going to be something that we can do right away, and where do we have longer term goals that we need to start working towards. Again, partnerships I think are key. And so, we've partnered in the city with the Center for Accessible Technology and Lighthouse to provide some of that guidance and support and structure and, process and all of those things to our work, which I think is incredibly helpful. We also have a number of, people who are really invested in this within our own community here in Oakland. We have the Mayor's Commission for Persons with Disabilities, who actively looks at our website and helps provide guidance and feedback, and holds us accountable in some ways to ensuring accessibility. And so I like to think that we want to bring those people in who care a lot and are passionate about this work into the process and help us support our work and move it forward. And so, just always looking for partners in this work, and prioritization, I would say, are the two key things.
Since you both focused on people and partnerships, I'll skip to the tools. WebAIM has a tool called Wave, which is a web accessibility evaluation tool. That's both a Chrome extension and a website. You can just take any URL, put it in the browser, and it just gives you a report. And it's very legible, it's very usable, it's very approachable as far as educating you about the very specific things that are happening on your website. And it puts pins in your website, so you can see exactly where the website is breaking. So as far as an on-ramp or education, it's for how your website is breaking and how it kind of relates to the guidelines. I find that tool to be a really easy to use, low barrier to adoption, free kind of thing. So we have a couple questions. So I want to transition to the Q&A stuff, and then we'll sort of we'll come back. And the first question is from Noah. They ask, they themselves have multiple disabilities, and they sometimes are at risk of being asked, what do you think from your perspective, from the perspective of someone with multiple disabilities, about something on the website, it sounds like. So how do you balance embracing this welcomeness around accessibility and not always wanting to be the expert or the only person with a lived experience who's asked these questions?
Wow, that's a great question. I guess, well, one thought I had, if it's within the context of your own organization, I would encourage people at your organization to, it's great that you're there and able to offer maybe a direct perspective, but I understand not wanting to always be the person that people are going to for that perspective. And I think that is where maybe you can get your organization on board to thinking about some outside user testing and user perspectives with users with other types of disabilities that are using maybe other assistive technologies. And also who maybe don't have direct experience with your products and services, because obviously it could be easier to have someone internally, but an internal person has inherent biases with the product or tool and is also very close to it. So maybe that's a way to kind of create a shift, is to say, I don't mind to provide guidance to a certain extent, but we need to really think about looking outside and incorporating other users that maybe are current customers, and as well as users with disabilities that haven't even used your product or service at all.
Cool, thank you. Next up, another question from Noah. Is it more valuable for an organization to engage with users of accessible technologies who are familiar with that organization's mission, or is it more advantageous to seek consultations from someone completely outside your organization's scope?
I can speak from the city of Oakland. We have a large community, obviously, that of people who utilize our website and for very different purposes, right? So I think working within our community, there are going to be a lot of people who either have direct experience in navigating our website or don't, but that have value in being able to find services and information on the city's website. And so I'm always a big proponent of finding people in our local community to work with if we can. I also think that the external perspective and in bringing in additional partners that may be able to identify users that are outside of who we're able to bring in through our organization, I think is also helpful. But I think it depends on sort of the industry. If you have a very niche industry or something, that might be a different answer. I don't know.
Yeah, I know for us, when we engage with partners, we'll kind of develop kind of a user profile of what they're typically looking for. And we'll kind of look for different parts of our user tester database for different types of users that match that profile. But oftentimes we do try to look for a pretty diverse group of users, some users that have familiarity with the product, have used it to a certain extent, as well as other users that haven't used it at all. And then we also look at different types of assistive technologies. So users that might have multiple disabilities, users that are relying on screen reader technology, users that are using magnification tools, as well as we look at different age ranges, different backgrounds, different levels of kind of tech savviness. So there's a lot to consider. And I do think all of those kind of wide range of profiles and perspectives are really useful and will ultimately drive the experience forward, because oftentimes, we don't really dictate who our end customer is. As long as they're interested in using our product or service, we want to make it available to them, even if they don't really have any prior experience with it. So I think it's valuable to kind of do both.
Awesome. Thank you. Our next question is from Skylar, and they ask, I appreciated the emphasis on user testing as a step beyond automated checks, but do you have any advice for smaller companies that might not have the resources, financial or otherwise, to run that caliber of testing? It's a good question.
Well, I think, I know we kind of addressed this in an earlier question, but, if you do have someone within your organization that does use assistive technology, of course, they are going to have some inherent biases, but if they're willing to provide a perspective, that can be at least a really good starting point. And, if they're within a particular community, like myself, for example, being low vision, like I'm, pretty in touch with kind of low vision blindness community and do a lot of work in that community. So if someone had asked me about a product or service, I would have other contacts, within my network that I could also tap. And you might be able to at least get in touch with a handful of people that are willing to support, at maybe a lower cost, or even give a free, free perspective. So I would say kind of networking that way, maybe start with someone within your organization, if possible.
Sean, can I ask you a question actually around this, because you might actually have a good perspective or knowledge of specific tools, but
Sure.
I think I'll start by sort of answering one, idea or one thought, as well as to just test your website yourself a bit as well. So one of the things that Jesse has done a lot of on the city site and we've done is, tab through your content and make sure that you can access everything yourself. I know a long time ago when I was just getting started with this, there were some tools and things like that would allow you to simulate a screen reader experience and be able to, to have that experience on your own website. Are there still tools like that available? And, is that actually a recommendation for something that you would say to do or not, is test out some of those tools yourself?
Yeah, I think some of those kind of simulation tools, I have seen some of those in the past as well. I think it's an interesting concept, and it can kind of give you the feel of what it's like to use a screen reader. But I think the best option is to really try turning on a screen reader yourself, which, whether you're using, and back to a point I made earlier about big tech developers really emphasizing, built-in accessibility. One of the benefits of that is that whether or not your device is a Mac, a PC, or a Chromebook, as a laptop, all of those devices have a built-in screen reader that's pretty accessible to everyone to turn on. And, with a couple just quick Google searches, or even using the tutorial that's there within the settings, you can usually start to get an understanding of just kind of the basic navigation, like you said, how to tab, how to kind of navigate different elements. And you can start to try it out yourself and get a feel for what it would be like to use that tool. And I would say that's probably the best route, given that those are the tools that a blind or low vision user is directly going to be using, as well as, if they're on an iPhone, they're going to be using VoiceOver on iPhone, or if they're on Android, they might be using TalkBack, as well as some of the magnification tools. So I would recommend, if you're going to test on your own, I would try to use those built-in tools to the best that you can, as opposed to maybe like a third party that kind of simulates that experience.
I would put also a plugin for networking. I do think that from my experience, there are lots of people who do this as like singular individuals that offer these services, and they are findable. And so, yeah, if going to like a larger entity is daunting, that is a valid path forward. I also posted a link. So Exergy is working on its own kind of checklist and guidelines for like how anybody can kind of do accessibility testing. As we kind of put that together, I always send people the 18F checklist, which is a government agency sort of like that offers some guidelines and best practices. And they have like a really legible way you can, like, they talk you through like how to do keyboard testing, what all the keys do, and what to expect when you hit enter or down or over space. And I've just really found it like a really boilerplate, like simple introduction to some of these things that can be daunting. So I posted that link in the chat. And Apple's documentation on VoiceOver is also very easy to get a sense of. And I do agree, even if you're not really utilizing to its extent, having empathy for someone's experience, like who is using these things on a daily basis, really using a screen reader, there's really nothing else like it. So I would encourage everybody to sort of like use those tools, become familiar with those tools, just to sort of like generally understand how folks' experiences are different on devices. Cool. I don't see any other questions in the chat. If anybody else has any questions, please add them. Sean, Nicole, if either of you just have anything else you want to end with, we're happy to kind of like go out on that as well.
I don't know. I feel like we've covered a lot.
Yeah, that was a lot of stuff today. Really appreciate you both bringing your expertise today to the group. We'll be working, so Oakland Exergy will be working with Lighthouse on an ongoing basis in the future to kind of do a series of accessibility workflows to sort of let everybody know that the workflow we've kind of engaged in now is Lighthouse is going to come in and check our work to date. Like, we're going to do the expert path first. They're going to kind of check everything. And then we're gonna bring in the usability round, and like we're gonna have folks just sort of like user test everything. And we're gonna create a bunch of tickets. We're gonna hand those tickets off to our engineers. Our engineers are gonna do their best to resolve all those issues. And then we're gonna bring Lighthouse back, and they're gonna check our work, basically. Like, how did we do? Like, did we actually do that right? Did we miss something? And they're gonna basically help us like catch anything that we missed again. And it will go back into that next iteration. And I think the lesson there is like, you're just not done, Yes. So like right behind the new, WCAG, there's like another WCAG that's coming. There's after 2.0, there's 2.1. And This stuff gets more complex, like as our devices become more complex, as the interactions themselves become more complex, like the rules change. And so it's an ongoing thing. And it's really, I would encourage everybody as they're doing this stuff. We're doing this with Oakland now. It's like to publish an accessibility statement, just so you kind of let everybody know, here's the current state of things. We're not perfect. We have not answered all these questions. This is an ongoing process. And I think aligning not only your expectations of the team, but the community's expectations of what they can expect from your services, I think helps everybody. Because it sounds like what we heard from folks is like not saying anything and having ambiguity is more harmful than anything else.
Yes, I completely agree. I think making progress and it is an ongoing thing, and it's not about being perfect, but it's about trying to be better and move things forward and really try to build for everyone. And at the end of the day, a lot of these accessibility principles do benefit all users, and it helps drive a more usable design and a universal design. So
Cool.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Nicole, for prioritizing this work. Yeah, do you want to, I'll shut up.
Oh, no, I was just going to tell a quick story about how I was doing some training recently within the organization and gave some bad advice that was outdated. And I didn't realize it, like I hadn't kept up with my documentation. And so I would just say, yes, never done, always keep learning. There's always new advice and new guidance out there. And so we just have to keep going and make progress. But
Cool. Well, I was going to say thank you, Nicole, for being an example of someone who's like prioritized this stuff and allowed us to have this space to do this work. And always thank you, Sean, for bringing your expertise and reminding us that there's a wide range of people to talk to and multiple, experiences that we need to kind of like consider. We're trying to create solutions. Please use the Slack channel for any follow-up questions for Nicole or Sean. If you need direct links to folks' LinkedIn's, or if you have follow-up questions, happy to answer them there. Thank you, everybody, for coming today. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
thank you.
So I added there's a separate Zoom if you want to jump on that.
Okay, I'll jump over there. Thanks.
Cool. See ya. Bye.